Good morning. Would you pray with me? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Well, believe it or not, we're officially into fall as of earlier this week. It's hard to believe it's going to be 90 degrees today, but we are officially in fall. Fall is my favorite time of the year. The days get cooler, the trees turn to beautiful colors, and the football season has started. And there's also baseball playoffs, if you care who's in them. I'm looking at Karen, her beloved Cubs are out. And those dang Cardinals. This time of the year reminds me that it's often a time of settling in, sitting by a fire, cuddling with a pet or a loved one with a blanket. I'm often comforted by the autumn season, especially when I can put on a sweater and just be. Blankets and sweaters and rest, three of my most favorite things, remind me of the autumn season. Our study of James these past few weeks reminds us that although sometimes we might wish to be disconnected from the world, under our blankets of warmth and comfort, we should not forget that as Christians we are under construction. As our Methodist founder John Wesley said, we are constantly moving on to perfection. Now is not the time to disconnect and be content where we are. As Christians, we are called to work on our behaviors, our speech, and to walk the talk in order to fully live an authentic Christian life. In week 1 of our Under Construction series, Reverend Kama reminded us that James teaches us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to grow angry. We are to be doers of the word, and not only hearers who sometimes mislead ourselves. In week 2, Reverend Kama reflected on faith and works. The famous line, "Faith without works is dead," exclaims James chapter 2, verse 26. Our Christian life is like a boat with 2 oars. We need both faith and works to get us through and across the lake of life. And last week, Kama talked about how our words can be hurtful. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can most definitely hurt me. This is different from the rhyme we learned as children, that words can never hurt me. We know that's not true. Words can wound, and wound deeply. And before we speak, think. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it important or inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Today we're focusing on James's words on living wisely and living humbly. And I invite you to think for a moment about someone that you feel is very smart. What are the characteristics of that person that has come to mind? When I think about people who are smart, someone like Bill Gates comes to my mind. He's kind of geeky and nerdy, right? And very rich. He has glasses, he speaks in a kind of a monotone. He's very intelligent and can be a bit intimidating. And think of Apple founder Steve Jobs. I see him in his black turtleneck and jeans, and he's thin, he wears glasses. Something about the glasses. And he's brilliant. He died a few years ago from cancer, too early. Steve Jobs is admired for his brilliance and creativity, but it turns out that he was very difficult to deal with in his interactions with others. He was described as a bully by those who knew him, as a co-worker, a friend, or a family member. According to Steve Jobs' biographer, Walter Isaacson, he was described as autocratic, controlling, mercurial, temperamental, cold, absent, obsessive, distant, passionate, rebellious, and basically a jerk. My sermon today is not about admiring or bashing Steve Jobs, but my point here is that being smart is not necessarily the same thing as being wise. Now I invite you to think about someone who you view as wise. What images come to mind? What does the typical wise person look like? How do they speak? And what is their personality like? For me, a wise person might be someone who's older, maybe a bit rumpled, someone who speaks slowly, and is generally someone I want to sit down and have a conversation with over a cup of coffee. The wise person is often older because wisdom often comes with experience in life. And I have met young people who are wise, and it kind of surprises me when that happens because it's an ingrained stereotype that I have that wisdom comes with being older and more experienced. A wise person does not need to be a certain age. Anyone can be wise at any age. A wise person is often approachable. I like being around wise people. A wise person is usually a good listener and not an interrupter. A wise person is a storyteller and is someone who makes you feel valued. A wise person is observant. Think of that owl in a tree, sitting quietly looking around. Owls are an image that we often use when we think of what it is to be wise. Now, it's certainly possible that a wise person, or a smart person could be wise, and that a wise person is often smart. But smart people sometimes do dumb things, and wise people sometimes do dumb things. So let's look at what the passage from James tells us today about wisdom and how it relates to our Christian way of life and faith. James says that real wisdom comes from God. In chapter 3, verses 17 through 18, it says, "Real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy and blessings." I love that James describes true wisdom as being gentle and reasonable. Are the wise people that you have met, are they gentle and reasonable? James doesn't mention that a wise person needs to be older. James tells us that true wisdom comes from how we relate to others. James tells us that it's hard work to treat others with dignity and honor. And he tells us that wisdom comes from God, and it grows in us based on how we live and relate with each other. It's the way you live, not the way you talk, that counts. Now, I listen to National Public Radio often, usually in the car, and a few years ago on the show StoryCorps, a young woman shared a memory of her growing up and her relating to her grandmother. Chloe Longfellow's father died when she was about 3 years old, and her mother had to take on several jobs to make ends meet and support the family, and often had to work nights. So Chloe often spent time with her grandparents while her mother was working, and she became especially close to her grandmother. Her grandmother was named Doris, and when they spent time together, often cooking in the kitchen. Chloe remembers how her grandmother this way. She says she had red hair. It was red hair out of a bottle, but it was still red hair. And she was a spitfire. If you messed with her and she didn't think it was right, she would tell you. But I do remember that she always smiled with her eyes. Even when she was angry, and even when she was tired, she was my very first best friend. Chloe's grandmother taught her about acceptance and how to be a good human being. And Doris, the grandmother, would say, "Now see, honey, this is how the world works. Some people are onions and some people are potatoes. It'd be a really boring soup if you just put in potatoes in there, wouldn't it? But if you add leeks, and if you add some bacon, then you make this wonderful thing." And all these different people come together to make this wonderful thing called our world. It fits in pretty well with our spice theme today. And Chloe tells of a time when her grandmother had grown some beets, and they brought them in from the house and were cleaning them. And Chloe had beet juice all over her hands and accidentally left a tiny handprint on the cookbook page of beet juice. And Chloe started to cry because she thought she had ruined her grandmother's favorite book. But rather than scold her, grandmother took a piece of beet, rubbed it on her hands, and put her own handprint on the other side and made the thumbs touch in the middle of the print. She said, "It's perfect now. It's perfect now." Gentle wisdom. Wisdom from God. I love the book of James because it contains pragmatic things that we can do to live an authentic Christian life. A Christian faithful life is not just about praying and worshiping God and going to church. It's about doing good, serving others, and relating well with others in our world. Living a holy life is not just about personal piety, it's also about social piety. And this comes right out of John Wesley's teachings. He talks about the importance of personal holiness and social holiness and how we need to nurture both in our lives. It sounds like Wesley might have read James. James leads more on the doing part of faith. And sometimes, aren't you just relieved to have someone tell you what to do rather than you having to think it up yourself? A couple of weekends ago, I was at a friend's house and we were preparing to welcome guests coming in from a memorial service that we had done for her husband. And I said to her, please let me know what I can do to help get ready for the guests. And at first I was told to relax, you're a guest yourself. But then she said, do you do windows? Yes, I do windows. I was given a spray bottle and a paper towel and assigned to the windows on the front and the back doors of the house. And I was so relieved to be given a task, even something simple like that, just to help out. James gives us a list of things to do well and to live faithfully. Some tasks are easy and some are hard. And getting along with others in our world can be really hard, can't it? James chapter 3, verse 18. You can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoy its results only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other. Thankfully, we have God to help us cultivate a gentle wisdom that allows us to love each other, even if we disagree with one another. Christian writer C.S. Lewis has a wonderful metaphor from his famous book, Mere Christianity, that I'd like to share that fits in quite well, I think, with our under construction theme that we've been reflecting on these past few weeks. Lewis says, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild the house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably. He was British. And it does not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you had thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting an extra floor there, running up towers, making a courtyard. You thought you were going to be made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in himself. Friends, as Christians, we are continually under construction, and God, through Jesus, is our project manager. God is helping us to learn to be faithful servants in our world. It's not always easy to build a beautiful structure, but with hard work and perseverance and teamwork, which usually involves getting along with each other, we will get there. We are never totally finished with our construction project of living wisely and living compassionately, but each day another piece of the project falls into place. So now, from the wise words of James, may we all seek to grow in gentle wisdom in the way we treat others. Remember that this kind of wisdom comes from a God who loves us as we are, but also encourages us to become better human beings as we walk in faith together. Let us be the light and love of God for each other as God lives in and through each of us. And may we seek out and see and feel the gentle and compassionate divine wisdom in each other that this day and always. Amen.